Before the start of every NBA season, Vegas odds makers come out with preseason lines on how many games they think each team will win. They set their expectations, and you can either bet over or under that number of games. Personally, I'm not a gambling man, but I do find these kinds of things interesting, and I also know that it's scary how accurate Vegas can be with these kinds of things sometimes. But even with that said, they aren't perfect, and mistakes certainly can be made. Just last year, the preseason line for the Pacers was 31.5 wins, and they went on to win 48 games, while the Warriors was 67.5, and they only won 58. Obviously, it's incredibly difficult to predict a win total with all of the variables of an NBA season, but that doesn't mean there aren't a few from this coming season that are more than a bit questionable. Let's go ahead and get started. Number 1, Detroit Pistons, 37.5 wins. First up is the Detroit Pistons, a team that hasn't won a playoff series in a decade and has only made the postseason twice in that 10-year span. They simply haven't been a good team in a while and have gone through more than their fair share of head coaches as a result. But with Dwayne Casey now in charge, I see them as a 38-win or better team next season. After all, they did win 39 games a year ago, despite Reggie Jackson only appearing in 45 of them and a midseason trade for Blake Griffin, who did have some nice moments in the 25 games he played in Detroit, but clearly needed some time to adjust to his new team. Now, obviously, Griffin has had a ton of issues with injuries himself, as has Jackson, so there's no guarantee that either of them will be able to overcome that and stay on the floor consistently. But I don't see how the Pistons could actually regress from that 39-win campaign a season ago. With Griffin getting more comfortable playing in the front court with Andre Drummond and a few of the additions they made in the offseason, I could see Detroit even potentially challenging for a playoff spot next season if healthy. Say what you want about Dwayne Casey's struggles in the playoffs, but he had a ton of regular season success in Toronto. So even with the injury question marks, I'd be pretty surprised to see Detroit win less than 38 games this coming season. Number 2, San Antonio Spurs, 43.5 wins. Next up, we have the San Antonio Spurs, the model franchise in the NBA that's been a shining example of consistency. After 2 back-to-back 60-plus win seasons, they finished with less than 50 wins for the first time this century a season ago. But the fact that they were able to hold it all together and find a way to make the playoffs with the whole Kawhi Leonard saga over their heads the entire year is still extremely impressive. So what doesn't make sense to me is how they can go from winning 47 games last season without Kawhi, trade him for an all-star and a quality big, and somehow get worse. They also retained Rudy Gay, brought in Marco Bellinelli, drafted Lonnie Walker, and should see even more improvement at a point guard DeJounte Murray. I understand that the West is an extremely tough conference, and that's even more true with LeBron now on the Lakers, and they did also lose Danny Green in that trade, but I struggle to understand the reasoning behind this. It would be one thing if Kawhi was still on the roster and we didn't know if he was healthy, if he was going to play at all this season, but they replaced his nearly complete absence from last season's team with an all-star caliber player that should fit extremely well in their system. They will very likely improve upon their win total from a season ago and challenge to win 50 games, not go backwards. Number 3, Utah Jazz, 48.5 wins. This next one will probably get some of you guys upset with me because I feel like the Utah Jazz and Donovan Mitchell specifically have become one of the darlings of the NBA after their surprising success from a season ago. Don't get me wrong, I like this team as well, and I think they're talented and very well coached. But we might all be looking back on that 2017-18 season for the Jazz just based on how it ended up. Keep in mind that Utah was 8 or 9 games under 500 all the way through the end of January, before finding their rhythm and ultimately finishing with 48 wins, with the health of Rudy Gobert being a pretty big determining factor in the team's play. But even though Donovan Mitchell was great as a rookie and they didn't lose any big pieces, I'm not sure they'll be improving upon that 48-win record from last year. They should absolutely be a playoff team, but with the West being so tough and that stretch of play that gained them so much attention, really only being 30 regular season games and a playoff series worth of evidence, I'm not convinced that they'll be winning 49 games or more this coming season. As I always say in my videos, I could be completely wrong, and the Jazz could be a top 4 team in the West and win 50+ games, behind a healthy Gobert and strong sophomore season from Mitchell, along with the steady presences of guys like Ricky Rubio, Joe Ingles, and Derek Favors. But I just feel like people are forgetting that this team wasn't without its faults last year, especially early in the season, and that it's probably a bit early in their development to be putting them up on this high of a pedestal in the preseason. I completely understand why people love this team and why they're excited about their chances, but again, it's just important to consider the entire season rather than just what happened in the last 30 games and in the postseason. Number 4, Houston Rockets, 54.5 wins. Moving on to the team with the best record in the league a year ago and was 1 win away from making the NBA Finals, the Houston Rockets. Despite that impressive 65-win season, there are a lot of people that are down on their chances to continue to be a threat to the Warriors in the West. They lost some key wings this offseason and replaced them with some rookies and Carmelo Anthony, causing many to question if their much improved defense from a year ago will continue into this coming season. However, I'm not as worried as some people are. They did manage to retain both Chris Paul and Clint Capella, and although they likely won't be as versatile defensively and there could be some issues with integrating Anthony into their system, this is still a team with the reigning MVP on the roster and that went 42-3 during the regular season last year in games in which CP3, Harden, and Capella were all healthy. They will likely be worse, but should still win around 60 games or maybe even more, depending on how well Anthony fits in. Either way, I definitely don't see them dropping below 55 wins next season, barring a ton of injuries. Number 5, Indiana Pacers, 47.5 wins. The next entry this week is the Indiana Pacers, one of the biggest Vegas surprises from last season, as I mentioned in the intro. After trading away Paul George last offseason, a trade most fans thought they lost in a big way at the time, Indiana was seen as a team in full rebuild mode that likely wouldn't challenge for the playoffs. As it turned out, however, they had a great year that honestly could have been a lot better, winning 48 games and nearly defeating the eventual Eastern Conference champion Cleveland Cavaliers in the first round of the postseason. Clearly, the odds makers don't think they will build on that success this coming season, but I really like what they did to improve this offseason and their chances of winning 50-plus games. They added Tyreke Evans as a playmaker and scorer, alongside Victor Oladipo, and some much-needed shooting with Doug McDermott. As I talked about in their season preview, I might not agree with how much money they threw at him, but that's irrelevant to how good I think they'll be this season. They did lose Lance Stevenson, but Evans is definitely an upgrade over him, and a few of their young bigs should continue to improve as well. And so long as Oladipo doesn't experience some huge drop-off in his All-NBA caliber play from a year ago, they should win at least 50 games next year. Number 6, Chicago Bulls, 27.5 wins. Moving on to a team that won just 27 games a year ago, their worst season in nearly 15 years, the Chicago Bulls. After trading away Jimmy Butler for some young pieces on draft night, it was clear that Chicago wasn't going to be very good a year ago. They were all in on developing young players such as Chris Dunn, Lauri Markkanen, and Zach LaVine once he returned from injury. But even with that as the primary goal, they did manage to outpace preseason Vegas lines by a pretty significant margin, and I think they'll do the same again this year. Wendell Carter Jr. should have a great impact in the front court as a rookie, and even though I question Jabari Parker's fit on the perimeter, this Bulls team has enough talent to certainly break the 30 to 35 win barrier. This is especially true if LaVine returns to the form he showed before injuring his knee with the Timberwolves, and Dunn continues to make strides as a shooter and playmaker. There are obviously concerns such as Parker's future as a 3 and a lack of backcourt depth compared to what's probably an overabundance of frontcourt players, but to think that they won't improve at all on last season's win total with a healthy LaVine and the other additions they've made doesn't make much sense to me at all. Number 7, Cleveland Cavaliers, 30.5 wins. Last up is a team that sure lost LeBron James this offseason, but is still being very, very underrated in this specific instance. I was honestly shocked when I saw how low this line was. I mean, even with James gone, the Cavs still have guys that can play and make some noise in the East. I'm not certain that they'll be challenging for a playoff spot, but to not even win 31 games would be crazy to me. Colin Sexton should have a strong impact as a rookie, and Kevin Love is still good enough to put up 18 and 10 or better for this team. Add in the contributions of guys like Tristan Thompson, George Hill, and J.R. Smith, among others, and I don't see any way they could be truly awful next season. This line puts the Cavs as the 6th worst team in the entire league next season, and I'm sure there are people that will disagree with me, but I just don't see them having that big of a drop-off with LeBron gone. I know it will be a big adjustment, but this isn't like the first time he left Cleveland. There's still some talent left behind on the Cavs roster, and I fully expect them to win at least 35 games this coming season as a result. And there you have it, 7 NBA Vegas preseason lines that make no sense to me. If you want to see the full list of where I got these from, there's a link in the description that you can check out. My name is Tucker, this is Sporting Logically. If you missed any of my previous Monday, Wednesday, Friday videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.